Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
To you, and it's time to say a very good morning to the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, Matthew Dickerson. Hello.
And a very good morning to you too, Iain. How are you going this morning?
Going well this fine Friday. Now, interesting committee meetings last night at Dubbo Regional Council. I think the hot topic, of course, is this decision about looking at a rate rise or a special variation to IPART. So can you bring us up to date with this one?
It is interesting, isn't it, when you say it's a hot topic. There's one way to get the public interested in what happens at a council meeting, and that's to talk about a rate rise. That definitely increases the interest in a council meeting, or a committee meeting in this case. So that was a discussion. And one of the things that's important here is that this wasn't a decision last night about whether or not we go for a rate rise. This wasn't what it was all about. One of the things we've talked about at council, that this council has been committed to, is to say that we want to make sure we are sustainable, financially sustainable, into the future. And we've been doing some work, which none of this is a secret. We've been doing some work from a recommendation or a resolution of council back in June to look at where we sit. We've engaged a consultancy firm. How do we sit in terms of our finances? And that analysis has been done, and that analysis has come back. And essentially, we have got a shortfall. And we knew that anyway, but it's good to have that confirmed. We're going to have a shortfall unless we do something. Now, it's just like a family budget, a household budget, a personal budget, and you've got income and you've got expenses. And if you haven't got those two lining up properly, you need to either increase the income or decrease the expenses. And so we've been looking at that, looking at how we can do that. Again, working with a consultancy firm to see how we can do that. We've held a number of workshops with councillors to go through a range of things. And one of the things we can do, potentially, is we've got some business assets that are either loss-making or not generating the profit they should be generating. And I don't want to go and name all the various assets we've got because some people get scared that we're about to sell them off. That isn't the case, but we've got to look at, can we be running those more commercially? Do we need to own some of those? Should we lease some of those out? And one that we did do that with some years ago was the caravan park. We weren't really getting a good return on our investment in that caravan park. We've now leased it out externally to NRMA, and that caravan park now gives us a better return and doesn't consume our staff in doing it. So it's that type of thing you're looking at. But ultimately, one of the things that councillors thought that would be worth having the conversation with the community is we may need to look at a special rate variation above the normal rate pegging amount. And so last night it was really, do we go ahead and make an application to IPART for a special rate variation for the 2024-2025 financial year? In other words, that rate increase would come through on the 1st of July next year. Or do we delay that and have a longer conversation with the community to the 2025-2026 year? Or do we forget about it altogether and just slowly run our finances into the ground, or look at other ways we can save money? In other words, cut back services, for example. That was the conversation around council at the committee meeting last night. Again, keep in mind, this is not a council resolution. This is just a recommendation.
This will go before the next council meeting, correct?
That's correct. So the recommendation will go to the council meeting. The recommendation was that any consideration of a special rate variation to IPART be deferred until 2025-2026. And in that time in between now and the actual application, which would be February 2025, the application would have to be into IPART. In that time, which is a fair length of time, have a conversation with the community, get feedback from the community, explain to the community in more detail how our finances sit, and really ask the question, would you like us to cut back services? Would you like us to get rid of some of our assets that aren't generating good returns? Would you like us to put the rates up? And one thing to keep in mind, Iain, is at the end of last financial year, so going back to June 2023, when requests came in our submissions for various things of our budget, the requests that came in for extra expenditure, if we have been able to say yes to all of those, now some of them you might argue weren't sensible, weren't logical, they weren't real requests, but if you just gave to all those requests, that would have added $8 million of extra expense to our bottom line. In submissions that I see around budgets, it's very rare that I see someone saying, please cut back our services. People are typically asking for more things from council, but you've got to find the money from somewhere.
So potentially, I've got a couple of quick questions here for you. Okay, so Council has been reporting consolidated net operating deficits for the financial years 2019-20, 2020-21, 21-22, and you also adopted a budget for 2022-23 with a net operating deficit. Now, I realise the current council basically came in December 2021. Has this been fiscal good financial management or not?
Well, when we came in the last 3 years, so December 2021, when we came in, the last 3 years had resulted in approximately a net operating loss of $21 million. Now, logic says you can't keep losing money forever. You might have some money in the bank, you might have some reserves there, but again, if I go back to that household budget situation, you can have some money in the bank, you can keep spending more than you earn, but eventually you're going to get to the bottom of the bucket. And it's no different with council. The numbers might be bigger, but it's no different. So when we came into council, we had those last 3 years resulting in $21 million approximately. So we have to try and start turning that around. We couldn't turn it around in the few months we had left. The budget had already been set. The next financial year, I would have loved to have gotten us back to the black. We didn't quite manage to do that. But what we've got to do is make sure that we don't just keep accepting the fact that we're going to be in the red. We need to make some tough decisions, whether it be cutting back services or increasing rates. We can't keep going along in the red forever. It's fiscally irresponsible if we just ignore the situation and hope it'll go away.
But basically, for 4 financial years, it looks like council's been living on a champagne diet on a beer budget. Why the blowouts?
Well, I'm not sure that blowout would be the correct word. It's probably been a build-up of a range of things, and as with any budget, this can sneak up on you. You can have some extra expenses in some areas and a lack of income in other areas. Rate pegging does create an issue for us, and just inflation, if you think about what CPI, what inflation has been doing over the last year, over the last 2 years, it's been well above our rate pegging amount. So if inflation is running at, say, 6 or 7%, which it has been, and our rate peg is only, say, 3%, then again, logic says that we can't keep up with that. And so the only solution there is cut expenses or, again, look at a special rate variation above the rate pegging amount. We don't know what the rate pegging amount will be for next financial year. I hope it will be more than 3%. And when I say I hope it will be more than 3%, that sounds bad for residents because residents are doing it tough with cost of living expenses. But if we want council to be financially sustainable, we can't keep surviving on 3% if we want to keep delivering the same services.
So what happens if you're not viable? Do you get shut down? Does the minister, put you into administration? What happens? Well,
eventually that's what would happen. If you keep going on spending more than you earn, you can keep using reserves for a number of years, but you're going to get to the bottom of that. And if you get to the bottom of that, then state government would have no choice but to step in and put you into administration and sort out the finances. Now, keep in mind that we've got money in the bank, and people look at that and they say, well, you've got lots of money there, it should be okay. Some of those funds are externally restricted assets. So in other words, we might receive a grant fund from the state or the federal government, and we've got that allocated to a certain project. We cannot go and take that money and use it somewhere else. So that asset, that money is externally restricted. We've also got internal restrictions on some of our assets. So for example, we might be putting money aside to renew an asset. We might be building up some funds to renew an asset that we know that will wear out in 10 years' time or in 15 years' time. So we could take some of that money and use it in the short term, but when it comes time to renewing that asset, people would say, when are you going to fix that building? Or what about that road that needs repair? Whatever that asset might be that you had that money set aside for, if you don't then have that money, well, how are you going to renew that asset? So you're working on borrowed time. By doing that process, you eventually get to the stage where you do go broke. So it's not fiscally responsible. And certainly as the mayor, I don't want to be the mayor of a council that's not being fiscally responsible. And I'm sure councillors are the same.
Matthew, my understanding is that the Corporate Services Committee meeting has recommended that council defer the application for the 1 year, that what we might call option 2, as opposed to going for basically an immediate application. Is that correct?
Not quite. It's certainly been deferred, but it's not a definite. So in other words, the deferral is that the consideration of a special rate variation be deferred. It doesn't mean it's definitely going to go ahead. And what that does is gives us time to have the conversation with the community about, do you want a special rate variation? Do you want to cut services? Do we want to get rid of some assets? What way do we want to make ourselves financially responsible? What's the best method to do that? And I think that's a longer conversation and a more nuanced conversation with the community rather than just a headline that might say rates are going up. I think we need to have that conversation in a very open, transparent way. So the deferral is about consideration of a special rate variation, not about definitely going ahead.
Okay, so councillors can vote to either go with an application now or vote to reconsider it in 12 months' time. Is that a correct interpretation?
So the committee recommendation says that considerations for a special rate variation to IPART be deferred until 2025-2026. So that's if the councillors go with that at the council meeting, because again, last night wasn't a resolution of council, then that would be the process. There would be a deferral, there would be a conversation, and then a decision would need to be made by a future council at a future council meeting whether or not to make that application to IPART. Councillors could also change their mind and say, no, we've actually thought about it in the 2 weeks and we'll actually go for a special rate variation in 2024, 2025. Or they could say, forget about it altogether, we don't want to do anything, we'll just go along and hope someone else fixes the problem in the future.
Am I being cynical if I suggest that it's going to be pushed past the next election so that if it's done early in the term, the council will still be there for a full term?
Look, it may be something that councillors in what they're voting for may consider the election in September 2024, but the reality was the discussion was more about having enough time to have that good, open, honest communication with the community. If we went ahead with the special rate variation for the 2024-2025 year, we would need to get the application in to IPART by the 5th of February. Now that would mean we'd have to make a resolution at the end of November, we'd have to get communication out in December, have to have a council meeting in January. December, January is not a great time to be going out and having some sort of community consultation. A lot of people are away, people in holiday mode. So I think it would be more cynical to say that we did it for the 2024-2025 year to try and get people to ignore it or miss it when the submission period was on and hope people didn't notice it. I think this way is actually being much more transparent with the community to signal to them that in the 2025-2026 year, this is something that's going to be considered. You've got a long period of time to understand it and actually help give some feedback to councillors.
Mayor Matthew Dickerson, it'll be a very interesting council meeting. We are out of time. I thank you very much for your time this morning on 2 to You.
Always my pleasure, Iain. Thank you.
Mayoral Memo with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.